The call from the ice world. The thermal generators were failing again. Commander Kira Puddle stood at the observation dome of Haven 12, watching as another aurora storm painted the perpetual night sky in haunting shades of green and blue. The beauty would have been breathtaking if it wasn't killing them. Each wave of electromagnetic energy brought their generators closer to collapse, and with external temperatures hovering at -120 degrees Celsius, collapse meant death. Commander, Lieutenant Riza burst through the door, his breath forming crystals in the increasingly cold air. Generator 3 just went dark. Engineering says 2 and 4 won't last another storm cycle. Kira's fingers tightened on the railing. Haven 12 had been humanity's most ambitious attempt to colonize the Outer Rim, a state-of-the-art facility built to house 5,000 colonists on a resource-rich ice world. Now, 6 months in, they were down to 3,000 survivors, and that number dwindled weekly. "Get everyone into the central hub," she ordered. "We'll shut down the outer rings to conserve power." It was a temporary solution, and they all knew it. The central hub could only sustain them for perhaps another month before their resources ran out completely. In the emergency council meeting that followed, faces that had once shown hope now displayed only exhaustion and fear. Director of Operations Nikolai Volkov, once a picture of corporate confidence, now looked as brittle as the ice outside. "The Galactic Colonial Authority has denied our request for evacuation," Nikolai announced, his voice hollow. "They say we knew the risks when we signed up for an extreme environment colony. They've classified this as a predictable operational challenge." Scattered bitter laughs echoed through the chamber. Predictable. Nothing about Haven 12 had been predictable. The geological surveys hadn't shown the severity of the electromagnetic storms. The environmental reports hadn't accounted for the massive ice-dwelling predators that could sense electrical currents. The corporate projections certainly hadn't included a 40% casualty rate in the first 6 months. "What about the Centaurian engineers?" asked Dr. Yu, their lead scientist. "Their thermal technology is supposed to be unmatched." "They won't come," Kira replied. "No one will. We're too far out, too dangerous. The corporations have written us off as a failed investment." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant groaning of metal contracting in the cold. Then, from the back of the room, a voice spoke up. It belonged to Jana Okafor, one of their xenobiologists who had survived 3 weeks trapped in an outer research station during their first major storm. "What about a Deathworlder?" The suggestion sent a ripple through the room. Deathworlders, humans who had colonized and adapted to the most extreme planets in known space, were legendary, but also controversial. They were known for their incredible survival skills and physical adaptations, but also for their difficult personalities and often brutal methods. "The Norse Prime colonies," Janet continued, gaining confidence. "They've survived worse conditions than this. Their people are born into storms that would tear our strongest buildings apart." Kira had heard of Norse Prime, a planet of endless storms and crystalline mountains, where colonists had not just survived but thrived, adapting over generations until they were almost a subspecies of humanity. They were also known for their isolationism and general disdain for soft-worlders. "They wouldn't help us," Nikolai scoffed. "The Norse Prime colonies haven't answered a distress call in 50 years. "They might," Jana insisted. "Not for corporate interests or political favors, but for survival. They respect that, at least, and we can pay them in something they value, our ice drilling technology. Their world is similar enough that it would be useful to them." Kira studied the desperate faces around her. They had tried everything else. The corporate way had failed them. The traditional colonial protocols had failed them. Perhaps it was time for something desperate. "Send the call," she decided, "but make it personal. Not to their government or their corporations. Send it to their survival guilds. Tell them." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Tell them we want to learn to survive." The message was sent that day, transmitted through the storm on their strongest remaining arrays. They didn't expect an answer, Most thought it was a waste of their dwindling power, but 3 days later, as Generator 2 finally gave out and the outer ring began to freeze solid, their communications array crackled to life. The response was brief, just 3 words in a voice that seemed to carry the weight of glaciers, preparing for departure. The arrival of the storm breaker. The Deathworlder removed their helmet, revealing features carved from decades of battling nature's fury. Frost-white hair was tied back in intricate braids, and eyes the color of Arctic ice surveyed the landing bay with predatory intensity. Scars like frozen lightning traced patterns across weather-beaten skin. "I am Ragnar Thorson, Stormwalker of Norse Prime," the giant announced, voice resonating through the chamber. "Your colony reeks of death and weakness." Commander Kira fought back a surge of anger. "We're fighting for survival here, Stormwalker. If you've come to judge us, you're wasting both our time." A sound like grinding glaciers emerged from Ragnar's throat. A laugh. "Good. There's spine in you at least, Commander. The weak don't admit their weakness, and the foolish don't face it. You've done both." The conversation was interrupted by emergency klaxons. Lieutenant Reese's voice crackled over the intercom. "Commander, Generator 4 is critical. We've got structural damage in Section 7. Ragnar's expression shifted from amusement to focused intensity. "Show me." They rushed through increasingly cold corridors, passing colonists huddled in thermal blankets. The Deathworlder moved with surprising grace despite his massive frame and heavy armor. When they reached the generator room, engineers were frantically working to contain a cascade failure. Without hesitation, Ragnar strode to the failing generator. His armor interfaced with the colony systems, holographic displays springing to life around him. "Your equipment is well designed," he observed, "but you're fighting the planet instead of working with it." "Working with it?" Nikolai scoffed from behind his frost-covered beard. "This world is trying to kill us. All worlds try to kill you," Ragnar replied matter-of-factly, hands moving through the holographic controls. "The difference is in how you respond. You've built barriers, walls. You hide from the cold and curse the storms. On Norse Prime, we learned to dance with the blizzards and sing with the ice." His fingers flew across the controls, making adjustments that had the engineers gasping. The generator's alarming whine began to stabilize. "You're bleeding energy fighting the electromagnetic storms. Instead, you should be harnessing them. Like this." The generator's output suddenly surged, but instead of overloading, it began pulsing in rhythm with the aurora waves outside. Power readings stabilized, then improved. "That's impossible," Dr. Yu whispered. "The storms should be disrupting the energy flow, not enhancing it." "Impossible is a soft world concept," Ragnar said. "Your generators can survive, but they need to adapt. Like you will need to adapt." He turned to face the gathered colonists, his massive frame backlit by the pulsing generator. "I didn't come here to save you. I came here to teach you to save yourselves. But my methods aren't gentle, and not all of you will want to learn." "We're dying anyway," Kira stated flatly. "Gentle methods aren't a luxury we can afford." Ragnar nodded approvingly. "Then let's begin. First lesson: cold isn't your enemy. Fear is, and you're all drowning in it." Over the next few days, Ragnar began implementing changes that shocked and terrified many colonists. He ordered certain sections of the habitat to be deliberately exposed to the cold, maintaining only minimal life support. "Your bodies need to learn," he explained. "You've grown soft behind your walls." The Deathworlder introduced survival suits of his own design, less heavily armored than his own, but incorporating the same adaptive technology. They were uncomfortable at first, seeming to prick the skin with thousands of tiny needles. "Neural interfaces," he explained. "They'll help your bodies learn to work with the cold instead of just enduring it. On Norse Prime, children are born with similar adaptations. You'll have to learn them the hard way." Not everyone accepted the changes. A group of colonists, led by one of the corporate overseers, demanded that Ragnar be removed. They couldn't comprehend deliberately exposing themselves to the very elements they'd been fighting. The situation came to a head when the Overseer attempted to forcibly take control of the central environmental systems. Ragnar's response was swift and terrifying. He sealed himself and the rebels in one of the cold training sections and shut down all heat except basic life support. "You fear the cold." His voice boomed through the chamber. "Then face it. Embrace it. Let it teach you who you really are." For 6 hours, he kept them there, teaching them breathing techniques and mental exercises passed down through generations of Norse Prime survivors. By the end, even the Overseer had gained a new respect for both the cold and their instructor. He turned to face her, frost crystals forming and melting on his exposed skin. "Your colony failed because you tried to impose your will on this world. I'm not here to help you win that fight, Commander. I'm here to help you stop fighting." As if in response, a massive aurora bloomed overhead, bathing them in ethereal light. For the first time since landing on Haven 12, Kira felt something other than fear while watching it. "When do we start?" she asked. Ragnar's scared face broke into a fierce grin. "We already have." Learning to survive. The next month transformed Haven 12 into something none of its original planners would have recognized. Under Ragnar's guidance, the colony began to pulse with the rhythm of the planet itself, its systems no longer fighting against the endless storms but moving with them. The breaking point came during what the colonists now called the Great Hunt. Bio-readings had detected a pack of ice stalkers, massive predators that used electromagnetic fields for hunting, approaching the colony's weakest point. In the past, such encounters had ended in casualties and damage. This time would be different. "They're not attacking," Ragnar explained as they tracked the creature's movements. "They're testing. Like all survivors, they probe for weakness, show them strength, and they'll seek easier prey." Instead of reinforcing the barriers, Ragnar led a team of volunteers, including Commander Kira, out onto the ice. They wore the neural interface suits, now modified to emit electromagnetic pulses that mimic the ice stalker's own signatures. "Move like them," Ragnar commanded as they formed a circle. "Feel the ice through your suits. Listen to its song." The ice stalkers emerged from the storm, 12-meter behemoths with crystalline armor and sensor organs that pulsed with bioluminescence. In the past, their appearance had inspired terror. Now, the defenders of Haven 12 stood their ground. The battle that followed was unlike anything the colonists had experienced. Using techniques learned from Ragnar, they didn't just fight the creatures. They communicated with them through electromagnetic pulses, establishing boundaries through the language of predators. When it was over, not a single colonist had been lost, and the ice stalkers had retreated, recognizing the colony as territory held by equals, not prey. But more importantly, the colonists who participated had finally understood what Ragnar had been trying to teach them. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were becoming part of Haven 12's ecosystem. Dr. Yu's research team began developing new technologies based on the ice stalkers' electromagnetic sensory organs. Lieutenant Reese's security forces adapted their patrol patterns to match the natural rhythms of the planet's predator populations. Even the most skeptical corporate officials couldn't deny the results. Haven 12 wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. The Great Storm. 3 months into Ragnar's training, the planet decided to test its transformed inhabitants. The storm that approached Haven 12 was unlike anything in their records, a convergence of electromagnetic forces that threatened to tear the colony apart. "This is what we've been preparing for," Ragnar announced as they tracked the storm's approach. "Everything I've taught you, everything you've learned, this is where it proves its worth." The old Haven 12 would have battened down its hatches and prayed its generators would hold. The new Haven 12 had different plans. Commander Kira stood in the control center, watching as their adapted systems responded to the storm's power. "All teams, execute Storm Dance Protocol," she ordered, using the term Ragnar had taught them. The colony's generators began to pulse in harmony with the storm's electromagnetic waves. Shield emitters, redesigned using ice stalker biology, created a defensive field that bent rather than blocked the storm's fury. Power flowed through the colony like blood through veins, redirecting and adapting as needed. But the storm's greatest test came when a massive ice shelf, destabilized by the electromagnetic forces, began sliding toward the colony's main dome. In the past, such a threat would have meant evacuation and catastrophic damage. Ragnar and Kira led a team onto the surface, wearing fully upgraded neural interface suits. Using techniques that blended Norse Prime wisdom with Haven 12's technology, they planted resonator devices along the ice shelf's path. "Feel the ice's movement," Ragnar's voice carried through their comm systems. "Don't fight it. Guide it." The resonators activated in sequence, their frequencies matched to the ice's natural harmonics. Slowly, incredibly, the massive shelf began to shift its course, flowing around the colony like water around a stone. As the storm reached its peak, the colonists found themselves doing something unprecedented. They stepped out onto their observation platforms to watch. Through their neural interfaces, they could feel the planet's raw power, but now it inspired awe rather than fear. A new dawn. When the great storm finally passed, Haven 12 emerged not just intact but stronger. The colony's survival had proven something that would change human expansion forever. Adaptation was possible anywhere, if you were willing to learn from the world rather than fight it. During the final council meeting of Ragnar's stay, the changes were evident in more than just their technology. The colonists held themselves differently, proud, confident, but with a newfound respect for their world. Even their appearances had begun to show subtle changes, their bodies adapting to the extreme environment through the neural interfaces. "The Galactic Colonial Authority has requested our survival protocols," Nikolai announced, a hint of irony in his voice. "Apparently, we're now considered a model colony for extreme environment adaptation." "Tell them they're welcome to visit," Kira replied with a smile that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago, "if they're willing to learn." Ragnar stood to address the council one final time. "You've done more than survive," he said, his voice carrying the weight of pride. "You've evolved. Haven 12 is no longer a colony fighting against a death world. It's become something new, a bridge between human limitation and planetary adaptation." The Deathworlder's departure was markedly different from his arrival. Where once there had been fear and desperate hope, now there was respect and confidence. The colonists gathered to bid him farewell, many wearing the scars of their training with pride. "Will you return?" Kira asked as Ragnar prepared to board his ship. "Perhaps," he replied, studying the aurora-lit sky. "But not as a teacher. Next time, I'll come as an equal, to learn what new ways Haven 12 has discovered." As his ship rose into the storm, riding the electromagnetic waves with familiar grace, Commander Kira turned to address her colony. The neural interface beneath her skin hummed in harmony with the planet's energies, and she could feel the same connection in every member of her crew. "Let's get back to work," she said. "We've got a world to dance with." The story of Haven 12 spread throughout human space, becoming a legend among colonial expeditions. It marked the beginning of a new era in human expansion, one where success was measured not by humanity's ability to impose its will on hostile worlds, but by its capability to adapt and evolve in harmony with them. And on dark nights, when the auroras paint Haven 12's sky with rivers of light, newer colonists sometimes claim they can hear the old-timers humming in harmony with the storms, dancing the dance that Ragnar taught them, becoming one with the world that had once tried to kill them. The Deathworlder had come to teach survival, but in doing so had taught them something far more valuable: how to truly live.